All right, we keep it warm then. Okay, well then we'll go ahead and get started with the pre-meeting, and we'll start off with the budget amendment number 2. Mr. Pitlick.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. We have for your consideration tonight the second amendment to the fiscal 21 budget. There's only 4 items on there, and I'll try to briefly go through. The largest one by far is the Ridgecrest Zone 2 and 3 waterline replacement. That was, you may recall, like a $2.1 million project initially. It was approved by council in the fiscal 20 budget, but it was not carried forward into the fiscal 21 budget. So we need to do that. It involves some funding from the capital fund and also some funding from the water fund. The full amount from the capital fund will be carried forward. The water fund will be asked to contribute another $272,000 to the project to cover some unanticipated costs that have come up along with the construction. Also for tonight, there's a project for the Goodstein Parking Lot. Again, you'll recall that was approved as a $1 million project. The bid came in slightly over that, but in addition, we had some engineering fees we needed to add to that. You may recall the council considered that action several weeks ago to add some in-house engineering costs to those projects. So in order to cover the full cost of that, we're requesting an additional $160,000. The $160,000 will come from the Opportunity Fund where the original $1 million came from, and will be moved into the Capital Projects Fund and expended from there. Another project is for covering the CALIA contract expense. Again, that is another recent action that council took regarding some accreditation for the police department, and that's in the sum of $38,000. And finally, we have $92,500 that will be coming from the River Fund. This will be to adjust 2 contracts, one with Stantec and one with Golder. Stantec will be a contract adjustment of $50,000, and Golder will be add to the contract contingency of $42,500. Those funds will come from the available resources in the River Fund. So the total amendment is $2.5 million, but the actual net of new money is approximately $525,000. So would entertain any questions?
Any questions from anybody? I think we're good. Anything else on that one there?
No, that would be up for your consideration during the meeting tonight.
Okay. All right, then we'll move on to letter of support for the Casper Housing Authority's application to the Community Wins Grant Program to support transitional housing programs. Mr. Pitlick.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, I would like to ask Liz to come up and address that.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, tonight on the agenda is a letter of support and a resolution for your approval. What this contains is Sustainable Strategies, who is the consultant that we hired to help us source grants and work with economic development opportunities for Casper, identified this grant called the Community Wins Grant as one that can help us with some transitional housing development. The Community Wins Grant is a partnership with the U.S. Conference of Mayors and Wells Fargo Bank and their foundation. This partnership assists cities with the opportunity to invest, strengthen, and address housing affordability issues. The awards are aimed to recognize outstanding mayoral-based initiatives that assist the city in reducing the cost and burden of housing and increase access to safe and affordable places to live. The types of housing programs include transitional housing, rentals, and home ownership projects and programs. What we're looking at with this particular Community Wins Grant is adding 19 units of transitional housing on the Life Steps campus, partnering with the Casper Housing Authority, who is our housing official here that we contract with to really expand the programming in Casper. We have emergency housing. We have a housing first. We have got low-income housing. But transitional housing is designed to help families, keep them together so they're not separated, because again, sometimes even with the rescue mission, we see genders separated. So this program would be to keep families together and also to help, and I think this is important given our council goals, the unaccompanied youth. So in partnership again with the initiatives that the school district has had with helping put youth into safe housing, that's part of this transitional housing. Get them into a safe place to live, give them some work skills. They will eventually be able to transition out of this housing on life steps and be able to look at home ownership themselves and getting into apartments. That's the goal. So what we're looking at is a medium-sized city in this grant program. The maximum award is $150,000. That amount through this grant, coupled with what we as the city already provide them through the 1 cent, as well as some other grants that they have been working to secure, which they receive through the Wyoming Community Foundation, and also another smaller one, will be able to get this program kicked off. And so we're looking again at an implementation in 2021. If we are successful, the requirement of this grant is that the mayor or a designee from council will need to go to the mayor's conference in Washington, D.C. in January to accept the award, and then there would be a requirement then to have a cool kickoff up at the Life Steps campus. So that is our contribution. No more matching grant funds. Carter had asked me that. So there's nothing financially that council's being asked to do other than to provide a designee to the conference and then to do a big splash on this opportunity for Wyoming. And again, a lot of these grants that we're looking at, Wyoming's not applied for before, and so this is something that I think would be neat. It's a fairly straightforward one, and we would need the letter of support in the reso. So I think those are the high points of, yeah, that's the high points. Highlighted them all. So if you all have questions for me, be happy to entertain them.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I understand correctly, this is going to basically be used as remodel of things we have on the campus now. Is that correct?
Your Honor, yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Not building new facilities or structures out there. The beauty of that campus with the 9 buildings that are on there is that they are, I think the application's actually been neat to be able to tout what we already have on that campus and the programming that's there. So yes, we would be doing remodels in Building F and continuing to get that ready to house families with the bathrooms and the cooking facilities and that sort of thing.
Any other questions?
Okay.
So you just need a
Tonight
thumbs
it's
up for
on,
letters.
it's on
It's
consent.
on the
and-
agenda,
Yeah,
okay.
that's on the agenda.
Sounds good.
Thank you all.
Okay, thank you. Move on to the Casper Event Center naming rights. Mr. Pitlick.
Mayor, Council, if I could defer to Mr. Cortez on this.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, kind of a different topic, you know, than anything we've really ever tackled before with regard to the event center. Just because, you know, I grew up here and we've always called it the Casper Event Center. Well, change is kind of afoot, and with your approval, what we're basically looking at is the renaming of the Casper Event Center. As part of our contract with Spectra, one of the main pieces of advertising in their inventory would be to name the building. And so that's pretty explicitly spelled out in our contract with them. And it's kind of been tasked with them, like, hey, if you can find somebody that'll pay a bunch of money in sponsorship fees and get the building named after them, that's on you. And after 2 years of us, you know, in conjunction with the city and Spectra putting out proposals to the general public and to businesses and kind of seeing what kind of interest we can garner, we finally have found somebody that has stepped up and said, we'd like to give it a shot. And that is Ford within the state of Wyoming. And so if you look through the memo that I produced for this, it would be known as the Ford Wyoming Center is basically what the Ford dealerships of Wyoming would like to name it. And this hasn't been ratified, it is explicitly spelled out in our contract with Spectra that it's got to be approved by council. And I think probably the main reason for that is just in case we had somebody that wanted to sponsor it that maybe wasn't somebody that you'd want to name the building after or something. But with Ford, you know, we think that that's pretty benign from that respect, unless you're a Chevy guy like myself. But regardless, you know, they've stepped up to the plate. I do have a breakout of what the financial pieces of that deal are at this point, and it starts at $75,000 total contribution for this year, and then kind of as you get into the later years of the agreement, which would be in the 2026 arena with the escalator, you arrive at about $88,000. Just so you know, we have talked with corporate from at the Spectra level to say, hey, what does something like this fetch? Like, we were trying to really ascertain what that could be. You know, as you can imagine, it ranges, you know, from multi-million-dollar deals to, you know, 50,000, 60,000, 70,000. We were kind of hoping for a higher number, you know, who doesn't? But at the end of the day, we've never had it, you know, and so we're kind of looking to just kind of set the market at this point and say, what is it worth? We did put it out for RFP, kind of in an informal manner back in 2018, and then we put it in kind of an all-hands-on-deck formal manner in 2019. And we really didn't get any bites until Ford kind of circled back and said, hey, we'll kind of give this, we kind of like the idea a little bit. And that's kind of where we're at now. So we're looking, this would be kind of one of the final pieces of the approval process to where we can kind of formalize the agreement. And so that's my reason for being here tonight. I'll take any questions.
Any questions? Councilman Hopkins.
Just curious, Mr. Cortez, is this an entity of Ford Motor Company, Ford, Wyoming? As opposed to a dealership?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I take it as it's kind of a group of the Ford dealers within Wyoming kind of put money into a pot kind of for marketing purposes.
Okay.
And I don't think it's nailed to a specific.
It's some entity called Ford of Wyoming.
Yeah, it's a group, kind of a spin-off, if you will, or a subset of Ford Motor Company.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Tim, initially, we were just looking at a year initially, but obviously this has gone, which I think is great that we got it for 5 years, but weren't we initially just looking at a year to year?
No, I think the original RFP, we kind of were asking for something greater than 3, because once you rename the building and you get all the emblems on all the shirts and stuff, and you kind of do all that stuff, you kind of need some time to kind of recover what you've kind of invested. Now, the investment part of it, that brings me to an important point, is on them, meaning we don't have to pay for the signage and the new shirts and all stuff. That will be part of them putting into that pot. So, Mr. Mayor, I think that the time horizon was probably 3 to 5 years is probably what we were anticipating. If we could have gotten it for one at, say, a higher dollar value, we might have been tempted to do that so long as they were going to pay for the changeover costs, if you will.
So just clarify then, the signage, shirts, and all that is separate than the amounts here.
That is correct, Mr. Mayor. It'll be on the Ford folks to pony up the money for what they would like to see and what they would like their name on, and the big sign that'll probably be out front will be on them.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
He's gonna buy the biggest sign. I can see it coming.
Right. Or park under it.
Is that a Jerry Garcia you're wearing? You didn't know I was a Garcia. I didn't know you were a deadhead, no. Who would have thought? You got me. It is, though. You never know.
Okay, we'll move on to the agenda review. Is there anything we have on there, Mr. Pidlick, that we need to discuss?
Not that I'm aware of, sir.
Okay. Anybody else have anything before?
I have something to bring up, Steve. Sorry to.
No, that's
I know
fine.
that isn't your favorite.
That's not my favorite term, but that's all right. Go ahead.
This isn't on the agenda, but I just thought I'd give you all a heads up. I think I've told you on a number of occasions, the DDA is sort of a fly-by-night organization in terms of their funding. They're always struggling just to make ends meet. And this is not a request from anyone, but we've asked them to do a lot. And I thought you should all know that they are struggling to operate the ice rink this year. The ice rink requires a chiller. Chillers are very expensive. And so they have been renting the chillers for the past several years. And it's $60,000, $70,000 just to rent one for the season. And they try to make that money back with the rentals of the skates and the admission to the rink, et cetera. But it never quite makes it. And I just like to suggest to you all to think about this, that we own the station, just like we own the Nicolason, and we own other facilities in town where we are responsible for maintaining the facility. Even with the event center, we are responsible for major maintenance. And again, no one has come to me with a request, but I would like you all to consider whether having a chiller for that facility would qualify in your minds as a piece of equipment that is fundamental to the operation of the facility so that it can go on, because I just doubt that it's going to be viable over the long term until they own one. So I'm not asking you to do anything other than think about it. And I say that knowing that we are in a world of hurt with our budget, but that facility is very important to the community.
I've got one other one. I would only do this now because it kind of goes hand in hand with David Street Station.
Okay.
But there's been a recent development in the old furniture store. As you're all aware, that the true real estate folks have taken over the store. Well, as of within the last probably 2 weeks, they have come in and they've talked to the folks at Ashby, and they have bought that property lock, stock, and barrel. So now we've got one owner for the entire property. And there's no decision on exactly what they're gonna do, but they do want it for development, and that's a good thing, because we've got some people that can do it, and they've got the wherewithal to get her done. And you may have seen some things happening down there the last week. They were tearing out some concrete and some pavement and so forth in the old furniture building area. But this was a new development which the OYD folks just heard about Monday night, as I recall. And the folks with Ashby Construction are going to stay in town. They've already got another building lined up to rebuild. And so they're very happy with it. They had never, matter of fact, they had brought to the OYD Architect Review Committee about 2-3 weeks ago. They had brought their new plans to kind of updated plans for the properties that they were going to build on their property. And so now it's kind of going back and being redesigned, probably be under one architect. I don't know that, but probably be under one architect, and it's real progress for the property. So looking forward to it. So thank you.
Anybody else with anything?
I'd like to correct my statement. I didn't mean fly-by-night in the sense of shady. I should have said they're operating on a shoestring budget. That probably would have been a better way to say that. So, and they're doing the best they can.
They're living donation to donation.
Pretty much.
Okay, well, got about 10 minutes left before we start, so we'll just take a break for now and start up at 6 o'clock. Regular council meeting to order. The chair would entertain a motion by minute action to excuse the absence of Councilman Huber.
So moved.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins, second by Councilman Johnson. Any abstention or nay votes? All voting aye.
Aye.
Please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion passed.
Kristen's here. Council meetings are also televised and can be viewed on cable channel 192. You please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance so that Councilman Pacheco will lead us in.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve by minute action the minutes of the September 15th, 2020 regular council meeting as published in the Casper Star Tribune on September 23rd, 2020.
So moved.
Moved by Councilman Johnson, second by Councilman Kathy. Any amendments? Any abstention or nay votes? All voting aye.
Aye.
Please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion passed.
The chair would entertain a motion to approve by minute action the minutes of the September 15th, 2020 executive session.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councilman Bates, second by Councilman Johnson. Any amendments? Any abstention or nay votes? All voting aye.
Aye.
Please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion passed.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve by minute action the minutes of the September 29th, 2020 special council meeting as published in the Casper Star Tribune on October 4th, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins, second by Councilman Bates. Any amendments? Any abstention or nay votes? All voting aye.
Aye.
Please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion passed.
The chair would entertain a motion to approve by minute action the October 6, 2020 bills and claims as audited by City Manager Napier. Moved by Councilman Pacheco, second by Councilman Powell. Any abstention or nay votes? All voting aye. Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passed.
Now is the time we invite anyone in the audience who wishes to speak with the council to come forward. As stated on the first page of the agenda, we ask the following. Please state your name and address. Direct all questions and comments to the mayor and the mayor only. No personal attacks on staff or council will be tolerated. Council will not respond to personnel matters. These will be referred to the city manager. Questions posed by speakers may or may not be responded to by council members. Presentations will be limited to 5 minutes, and duplication of speakers will not be allowed, nor will time extensions be permitted. Please note that public hearings and ordinances each have their own comment period. Please hold your comments on these items until we reach them. Is there anybody that would like to speak to council? You can take it off, yes.
Hello, my name is Gabriel Green. I recently moved actually from Ward 3, sorry Ray, to Ward 1, and I'm at 1321 half Oak Street. That's right, it's a half. I had a few things I was gonna talk about, but I don't really want to. They don't feel super pertinent. The main reason I'm here, one, I love coming to city council meetings. I like just listening to this stuff happen. It's pretty cool. Watching it on TV is pretty boring though, I'll admit that. Even as a wonk, I can't stand doing it. I prefer being here, seeing you guys smile. The reason I'm here is because I think that the country is all feeling really stressed right now and prone towards extremity. I think that if you look at the rhetoric around our upcoming election, particularly at the national level, we have a higher chance of physical violence than I think we've had in at least my living memory. I think that the biggest problem right now is that we don't have the institutions or mechanisms to talk to each other, to confirm that we're all on the same team. We all kind of consume our own media, listen to our own friends. So when fear starts, when this starts to take over, we don't have another voice telling us it's okay. If we're a diehard Republican or a diehard Democrat and we care about these colors so much, we don't have somebody on the other side to tell us that we're on the same team still. And I think that the fact that polls are finding that 67%, this was, I think, Real Clear Policy who said this, 67% of Americans think that a civil war is imminent right now. It's a pretty startling statistic, and I think the homogeneity of modern American culture, the fact that we all wear blue jeans, drink Coke, and eat McDonald's, means that even in a place like Wyoming, where we like to think we're safe and isolated, a national problem can very quickly turn into a local problem. So the reason I'm here is to ask the council what we're prepared to do as a city to help our people stay calm, to help our people ride out the election that will likely take much longer than one night to know the results of, given the propensity for mail-in voting. People have talked about things like a red mirage, a blue mirage, potentials of state legislatures in various states ordering their electors to go with the day of results rather than later results, or ordering them to discard certain things. Democrats have campaigned to keep the Green Party out. Republicans have done their part to keep non-Republican voters out. It seems like our democracy is failing pretty sharply. And so I like to count on local politics. So I'm just looking for some affirmation from you guys that you have plans in place if violence starts to spread through the country, if supply chains are affected, if food and medicine aren't as available, so that we can keep at least Casper and hopefully Wyoming from kind of tumbling over the edge that might, I really don't think that we're going to crumble completely, but I think we might have a really rough time. So I just would like to hear what you guys have been thinking about and what you have planned to try to keep us safe, while hopefully avoiding the authoritarianism that tends to follow a moment of civil discord.
Anybody have, Councilman Hopkins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Gabriel, I appreciate your concerns, but I think you have to look at Wyoming a little bit different than the rest of the country. There was a time before we had telegraphs that it might take 3 or 4 weeks to get the election results from one coast to another. And while there may be some delays, we have become pretty much instant news folks. And pretty much anything you read instantly probably doesn't have much analysis behind it. So I would just urge everybody to take it easy. Just back off a little bit and say, this too shall pass. Because Wyoming can do that. And Wyoming has done that in the past. We tend to lag on the way up, and we tend to lag on the way down in terms of economic development and economic motivation. So I do appreciate your concerns, and that's a good point. And thank you for coming to talk about it.
I don't know if I'm allowed to respond there. I don't want to turn this into some debate, but I guess part of my fear, and maybe I didn't articulate this, is that our leaders at the national level are going to be the folks who are jumping to conclusions. I'm not too worried about me. I know that the election will take time. I know that until the telegraph was invented, we had slow elections. There's a reason the inauguration is in January, not November 4th, right? I'm more concerned with how other people around the country are going to react. And as you said, we have a very immediate news cycle. And I'm worried that there are people who are on edge, and we can see it. Violence is like, the fact that rioting is even happening in places is like a sign of that, but it's happening from everybody. Everybody in all directions is just kind of looking for somebody to hit. And so I feel like just a message of stand by isn't what we need. Like, I would like to know if there are actual physical, tangible preparations that are in place so that if some type of legitimate crisis were to strike this country, like I said, like supply lines getting affected, we saw what happened with toilet paper. It was crazy. So like, what happens if it's a little bit more extended than just an artificial shutdown? And it's actually dangerous to go to work in some parts of the country, and Wyoming doesn't have the supplies it needs. We might lag a little bit. So my concern is just that this won't be a problem for 1 week. This will be a snowball that just keeps rolling down the hill, getting worse and worse, like 2020 has felt. And so I'd like to know, just as a citizen, like, what's our emergency preparation? What's our, plan if there are actual riots? What's our plan if, like, Colorado, if Denver starts burning? Like, what do we do? Because I feel like I'm not alone, and maybe like the 3 people at home watching this like feel the same. So I'd like to hear what the actual plans are.
I'll have a comment for you in a minute, but Councilman Pacheco.
Yeah, I think there's lots of questions and not a lot of answers. As far as just the election and things that are going on, a couple things that I can say. I know the mayor will probably have a few other things that he probably will mention. I have a great faith, number one, in our Secretary of State, and I have great faith in our clerks in the state of Wyoming, who will do a great job of having a fair election, I think, here in the state of Wyoming. And I do tend to agree with Councilman Hopkins in the sense that Wyoming is kind of off to that side. We're probably not going to experience what some of the other parts of the country are going to experience. However, in that sense, I think that I can agree with you in the sense that we are, in a sense, at this watershed moment here in the United States, where we're kind of looking at ourselves in the mirror. And I think as leaders, our hope is that for everybody to, no matter what happens on November 3rd, to say, this is how our democracy works, and this is how it should work. And hopefully the strain on the democracy and the 200 plus years on our nation will bear that strain. and I believe in our democracy, and I hope that it will. But I do believe that there are, unfortunately, people that won't maybe appreciate what happens on the election, whether it goes either side. And I think that that can be an issue. I do believe that we have a great police department. I think we have a great group of people that think, you know, and want to protect our community, and I think that'll happen. I won't go as to say there's been planning done, and I don't think the mayor is probably ready to make any comments on that, because I don't know if we've thought about it. I just don't know if that's been brought up to that, but it's a good thought to it. But I would remain, what I would ask our community is to remain calm, to trust the democratic process, and to know that our democratic process has worked for almost 300 years, and it can and will work, and not to listen to messages that go out there that I don't think are necessarily true on both sides, not just one side.
The only thing I would really want to add to that is if you look back to the last time that, if you ever look to a time that there's been a pandemic, there was no book written on it. There was no playbook. And I can tell you from this last year, we wrote things as we went along, and you have to figure it out as you go along. I don't think anybody left a playbook behind for during the Civil War to tell us how to handle that either. You haven't had riots to the level that we've had across the United States, and unfortunately, it's one of those things to tell you that that we know what we're going to do and how we're going to handle it. I think part of this has just been like this year has been. We have issues that come to us, and we've got to find the best way to solve those issues and resolve those issues. The flip side of that is that I can tell you that when we had our march on Wednesday afternoon that took over 2nd Street, I talked to the police department that afternoon and asked that didn't happen again. And Friday we had another march that took place. It was probably one of the most peaceful protests we had, or I don't even want to use the word protest. It was the most peaceful demonstrations that we've had. But I can tell you that I asked for a phone call to be put out to ask for additional help throughout the state, and the state came through in numbers. So I'm not concerned. It comes back to what Bob said. Wyoming is true, and I'm not really that concerned about here. I know that we're all going to pull together and band together. We have this year, and we'll take it as it comes to us, and we'll face each issue head on. But to tell you there's a playbook out there, there's not. And this is unprecedented times right now. So, that's probably not the answer you're looking for, but.
I appreciate the candor.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cassie.
more on a personal level, something that is recommended by, I think it's either FEMA or Homeland Security, but they stress just for a natural disaster, like tornado comes through, but to have 2 weeks supply of food, water, so that if you wind up with a tornado wiping out the east side of Casper or the water plant, that you can survive locally. And I think to a point, from your standpoint of what you're looking for, is if riots in California cut off the port of LA, then how do we get things? And we may not. And this gets back to then helping your neighbor, not panicking, and as most Wyomingites and the early settlers did, is you learn how to become self-sufficient. And I can't guarantee it, but if we totally ran out of food, I am not sure that Fish and Game would give you a ticket for going out and shooting an antelope. Okay? But they might. Don't get me wrong. Talk to your lawyer about that one. But you understand where I'm coming from a little bit, is that there will be a lot of self-reliance, actually self-calming even, to where you don't just go jump off the cliff. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I really do appreciate that. I will say I'm not too worried about me. I'm not too worried about a lot of people I know. I grew up hunting and fishing, right? I grew up with a dad that likes to go backpacking. So like I have enough where I don't think I'm going to starve anytime soon. It's the other people who are already struggling to get by that I'm worried about, where suddenly their supply, especially because we have this whole economy of poverty traps where people just get stuck in vicious spending cycles. And next thing you know, like they can't afford that go buy 2 weeks of food, especially if scarcity starts up and we have shortages. So I'm glad that you all have been honest with me. I appreciate your words of comfort. I hope my fellow residents do, but I would just advise, maybe think some of this through, scenario plan a little bit, because this isn't the first pandemic the world has ever had. Rome had one, Athens had one, we had one in 1918. Like this isn't new, and I felt nationally we had a lack of preparation for something you could predict. Civil war has happened here. Violence has happened all over the world all the time. So I'd like to see, some game planning for if that happens. The DoD literally has zombie scenarios planned out, so I would like to think we could plan something for if civil discord happens. But thank you all very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to council? Okay. And now declare the public hearing open for the consideration of the ordinance amending the franchise agreement with Rocky Mountain Power. Mr. City Attorney, do you have any exhibits?
Thank you, Mayor. We have one exhibit, exhibit number 1, correspondence from John Henley to J. Carter Napier, dated September 24, 2020.
Okay, Mr. City Manager's report. Mr. Pitlick.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. You recall or most of you will, back in November of 2017, the city entered into a franchise agreement with Rocky Mountain Power, in which the franchise fee was set at 7%. The agreement was scheduled to sunset in November of 2021. What this ordinance would do, if passed, would extend that existing franchise fee throughout the term of the franchise agreement.
Okay. Council will now listen to public comment. Public hearing comments are limited to 5 minutes and no duplication of speakers will be allowed. At this time, I'd ask those individuals who wish to speak in favor of the issues involving the franchise, please approach the lectern. All right, at this time, I would ask those individuals who wish to speak in opposition to the issues involving the franchise, please approach the lectern. All right, there being no one to speak for or against the issues involving the franchise, I now declare the public hearing closed. Please read the ordinance by title only.
An ordinance amending ordinance number 18-17, a franchise granting an electric utility easement to Pacificor, an Oregon corporation doing business as Rocky Mountain Power.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve on first reading the ordinance just read.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins, second by Councilman Powell. Any discussion? Any amendments? Any abstention or nay votes?
I'll be voting nay.
All voting aye.
Aye.
Please record the vote.
With Councilman Johnson voting nay, motion passed.
I now declare the public hearing open for the consideration of fiscal year 2021 budget amendment number 2. Mr. City Attorney, do you have any exhibits?
Thank you, Mayor. We have 2 exhibits. Exhibit number 1, correspondence from Tom Pitlick to J. Carter Napier, dated September 23, 2020. And exhibit number 2, affidavit of publication, is published in the Casper Star Tribune, dated September 24, 2020.
Okay, Mr. Pitlick, do you have a city manager's report?
Thank you, Mayor. As discussed in the pre-meeting this evening, the budget amendment, this is the second amendment to the fiscal 21 budget. It encompasses 4 different projects. It provides funding for a CALIA contract with the police department for certification. It provides some additional funding for the Goodstein Parking Lot. Some additional funding was needed because the bid was a little higher than anticipated, and also there's some additional engineering costs. The major component is to the Ridgecrest Zone 2 and 3 waterline project. This was a project that was approved for funding in fiscal 20. That should have been carried over in fiscal 21, but was omitted from the 21 budget, so we need to get it into the budget for expenditure authority. It does ask for some additional, approximately $270,000 to complete the project for some additional costs that have come up with the project. Then also $92,500 being requested from the River Fund to adjust a contract with Stantec and also provide a contingency with Golder, projects relating to the First Street Extension project. The total budget amendment is about $2.5 million, but the vast majority of that is covered through carryover, so it's not new money. The new money being requested in total is $525,100.
Okay, council will now listen to public comment. Public hearing comments are limited to 5 minutes and no duplication of speakers will be allowed. This time I'd ask those individuals who wish to speak in favor of the budget amendment, please approach the lectern. All right, and at this time I would ask those individuals who wish to speak in opposition to the budget amendment, please approach the lectern. There being no one to speak for or against the budget amendment, I now declare the public hearing closed. Chair would entertain a motion to, by resolution, authorize fiscal year 2021 budget amendment number 2.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councilman Bates, second by Councilman Powell. Discussion? Councilman Powell.
I'd just like to point out that there are a couple projects here that we are enabling the completion of that have been that are very important to the long-term health of this community. The Goodstein Parking Lot, as everyone knows, is sort of a parking lot, but it's sort of an anything-goes situation just because it has not been completed, it's not properly marked, and it's a critical facility for the development of our downtown and particularly access to the David Street Station. And so I want to express my appreciation to our city manager and all the staff who are involved in negotiating with the state, because this was a complex lease agreement that that is now in place, a long-term lease agreement that allows us to use this, to finish this facility and make it available to the public, and it will have an impact on this community for many, many years to come. I'd also like to mention that we are using a small amount of money to finalize the agreement to complete the First Street Reach, the second phase of the First Street Reach of the River Restoration Project, which is another project that will have a long-term impact on this community for many, many years to come. And these things get a little dry at times, but these are very important matters that we're supporting this evening.
Any other discussion? Any amendments? Any abstention or nay votes? All voting aye?
Aye.
Please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion passed.
Please read the ordinance on second reading by title only.
An ordinance amending section 2.60.050 to the Code of Ethics of the Casper Municipal Code.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve on second reading the ordinance just read.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins, second by Councilman Johnson. Council will now listen to public comment. Public comments are limited to 5 minutes and no duplication of speakers will be allowed.
Good evening again. I am Cheryl Hackett. I live at 4441 Moose in Casper. Let me just quickly get my papers ready here. So you all, as council, are the leaders of this city. The city manager and the city attorney work for you, and you work for us as the citizens and taxpayers of this community. When people want something done, they come to council, and we just experienced that with the public comment period today. So a few years ago, though, when women felt that their sexual assault cases were not being handled adequately by the police department, they came to council. And those of you who are on council at that time intervened in the internal affairs of the police department to a level that the city attorney at that time, Mr. Lubin, repeatedly cautioned was outside of council's jurisdiction. And I've recently written about my opinion on this. More recently, when many citizens, including some of you, were concerned about spikes in property taxes, you asked for the county assessor, Mr. Keating, to come before council, and he did that and answered questions, even though council has no jurisdiction over the assessor's office. And most recently, when massage therapists wanted tighter licensing regulations, they came to council, and you all have formed a massage therapy licensing committee to take a closer look into that issue and how you can help them. However, when I, along with other citizens, had a concern about a former councilman buying city-owned property that he voted to sell to the winning bidder and bought from that winning bidder while he was still on council, I was told by planning and zoning commissioners to take my concern to the city council. I was also told by the assistant city attorney to do that, and that was certainly new territory for me, so it's difficult to know how to navigate a concern of that magnitude. So I did that. I wrote a letter, and it was signed by other citizens who were also concerned. Yet today, I have never received a formal response from my letter, and actually the emailed version of it was directly forwarded by one of my ward representatives to the very person whose actions I had expressed concern over and asked for a potential investigation into. So while you guys said at the work session a couple weeks ago that any citizen can bring any concern to council at any time, that's true, but that does not guarantee responsiveness, which ironically is one of the city's core values, and it appears at the bottom of most of the city's documents. So hypothetically, if there was a concern that a citizen wanted to have someone look at and was just hitting roadblock after roadblock, breaking through that gridlock could be so difficult, it might seem like it would require divine intervention. It would be that difficult. At the first reading for the Gorgon Hills development, I had said that I hoped we could have some public discussions and some sort of policy changes to prevent that sort of thing from happening, which raises ethical questions. And I would like to again restate my appreciation for those of you who have brought this forward and for Mr. Henley working on it. However, if we apply critical thinking to the ordinance as it's written and ask ourselves if it's thorough and complete or if it's missing anything, I do think it is missing a few things. And I have just a few copies if you guys would like to see my suggestions in a very brief form. Councilman Bates, can I send those over to you? Would that be okay? Okay, thank you, and then you can pass those around. So I'll go through very briefly what I think is still missing. One, an avenue for citizens to report credible concerns, and the key word there is credible. I heard the work session, and if you were talking about a dog park, this is not, I saw the mayor walking a dog, and I think that's an ethical concern. I think most people are smarter than that. Two, adequate whistleblower protections. Three, an affirmative obligation to respond to reasonable conflicts of interest complaints. Again, the key word there is reasonable. Four, an ethics committee to receive and investigate credible complaints. Five, a provision preventing former officials from influencing city policies or being involved with city properties for a period of time after leaving public service. Other states have implemented what they call a cooling off period between public service and private work of anywhere between 6 months and 2 years. The U.S. House has implemented this, as well as the U.S. Senate, and presidents implement it as well. And sometimes states even put a lifetime ban on public officials being involved in projects or contracts that came before them while in office. So if you have created a massage therapy committee, I don't see why we couldn't also form an ethics committee. And again, as I talked about at first reading, I do think it would be very wise to have someone on that committee with either past or present law enforcement experience to be able to discern whether a violation was solely an ethical violation or if potentially a local, state, or federal law was possibly violated as well. It is important to note that these are not just my suggestions. They are from Columbia Law School and the New York City Department of Investigation, which is regarded as one of America's oldest, most respected, and most...
That's her,
Councilman Hopkins. What's that?
that's her 5 minutes.
I know, I was,
Okay, I'm wrapping up here. One of America's most innovative anti-corruption authorities. So together they formed the Center for the Advancement of Public Integrity, where they help municipalities create meaningful ethics reform. Sadly, their literature states it does not usually come about until after a federal corruption scandal has hit a city. So fortunately, we're not there yet, and I feel like now is the time to make meaningful changes. Well, this is before you now. So in closing, the Casper acronym printed at the bottom of the city's documents say communication, accountability, stewardship, professionalism, efficiency, and responsiveness. However, these are just inspirational words until they have a chance to be put into practice, and only then do they really become the city's core values. So you have that chance before you now, and I just urge you to strongly consider what you could add to the Code of Ethics ordinance to make it as strong as possible.
okay, thank you. Is there any questions of Ms. Hackett? Comments? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to address council on this matter? Okay, discussion? Councilman Pacheco.
In regards to some of the suggested potential additions, I guess that's why I waited, I didn't want to have it during her presentation, but the question, I guess I would give this to our attorney. Is our ethics not expansive enough? Is it just right? Are we missing the boat somewhere? I mean, I guess, you know, we did take some time. We wanted to step back. We talked about it in our work session. You know, are we not hitting the boat? And I know we can't please everybody. We're not going to hit the mark for every single point of everything. And we're never going to do that. It's been my experience in 8 years. We're not going to make everybody happy. But I want to make sure that we're doing this right. So I don't know what your thoughts are, John, about those 5 points that were made. I guess my question is, those 5 points, are we not hitting the mark on our ethics? I know that's a very broad, deep question. I don't need you to go into it that deep if you don't want to, so.
Great. Thank you, Councilman, Mayor, Council. Honestly, I like the ordinance with these additions. I thought they were good additions. I think that probably at least paragraph C was due, I think, to Ms. Hackett's concerns and to her communications with council, and council coming and saying, hey, look, we would like to have some type of clarifying language just to make sure that, you know, citizens don't feel concerned about this in the future. And so that's why we included paragraph C in the proposed amendment. As far as an avenue for citizens to report, again, there is no specific avenue addressed in the ordinance. I don't know that there's a specific avenue in other ordinances I've looked at. I know that Ms. Hackett submitted a paper with respect to the Columbia Law Group and an article that was published there. There were a lot of things in that article I really disagreed with, and I don't know whether you know, you need an avenue for citizens to report. I think here Ms. Hackett has found that not every report gets the response, and certainly the response that some citizen may want, but I don't think that that this council actually didn't consider what she had said, and there were other avenues too. If in fact there were some serious allegations, some serious facts other than simply speculation, I think for her to proceed. But if you wanted to establish a policy or procedure, we can do that. But at some point, are we just establishing policy and procedure, which means longer laws and less, a bit more bureaucracy and really a more cumbersome process? In fact, if there is some meritorious claim, that we now have this cumbersome process at the very beginning, as opposed to kind of going through the process and then coming around and making a determination. With respect to the second question that Ms. Hackett raised, whether there's adequate whistleblowers, we don't have whistleblower. I don't even know exactly how that would affect us here. Again, that's a pretty expansive federal statute, the one that they have in federal law, and I'm not exactly sure of the circumstances if this council would want to go down that lane, but we do not have such a provision here, except that in our personnel code, certainly you can have some discipline for actually engaging in harassment of another city employee or officer or the like. So if there was some type of payback or the like, and it was harassment, there would be that possibility, though that would not be within the ordinance itself. I don't know about, how you want to go about all of the ordinances. If we have, I'm now skipped number 4 because frankly I couldn't write. She was, Ms. Hackett, you were speaking too fast for me for number 3 to get it down. But as far as establishing an ethics committee, like you've done for the massage therapist, certainly you can't hear comments from everyone and anyone on that, as you do. If you need a specific committee, I don't know how you would sort that out in this particular case or in a lot of cases, because you don't have a defined group. Here you had some specific people that were relatively small in number for this community with a certain educational background and a certain vocation. And the council felt that that would be an appropriate way to proceed, particularly given the fact that the council did open this up for public comment and then acted upon that public comment by establishing the committee as requested by a number of people. And finally, a cooling off period, again, that would be up to the council. I see that the state has not put that in there. I was looking at the state statutes tonight to see if they had included that, but basically the state does say that with respect to a conflict of interest, that once you are out of your position, the state statute doesn't apparently continue on to bind you. However, you can still go back and say, while you were on council, while you were on a board, that you committed an ethical violation and were involved in awarding a contract to a family member or something like that, and have some severe criminal penalties imposed upon you. So the number of words here and the number of paragraphs, and we often get, I think, attorneys and counsel wrapped up in thinking these ordinances are too long and they're too wordy, but actually in this one, with respect, remember, this is just an amendment. The ordinance itself, as it currently exists, has multiple references to state statutes, including the governmental ethics statutes, including a long definition of anything of value with 13 particular things set forth, a reference to the prohibition when having interest in contracts, offenses, officer-employee prohibitions with respect to contracts being entered into. So there are a lot of statutes out there, but again, these are criminal things. If in fact there are facts there that someone would think that there was a violation of law, again, I don't know if anything was done from Ms. Hackett or the folks that she says that were concerned about this, and if they had anything other than mere speculation, which is a difficult thing in law enforcement, to simply say you're going to institute some investigation based upon speculation or conjecture, because that certainly wouldn't hold up in court. So I like the ordinance. I like the amendment. Could it be made better? In a lot of people's mind, I'm sure it could. Could it be made worse? In a lot of people's mind, I'm sure it could be. So I'm thinking you guys are pretty close to being right on the bubble with this, but that's just my opinion. If what Ms. Hackett or other people who have communicated with you say otherwise, I'll of course be happy to do whatever you choose.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you. I do think it is reasonable for a citizen to be able to lodge a complaint and know that an investigation has in fact taken place. Having been involved in ethics committees over the years and having been in supervisory positions where people under my supervision have had complaints lodged against them, it's fairly common for the person who lodged the complaint to believe that nothing at all is happening, when in fact a great deal may be happening behind the scenes following that complaint, and that may even lead to some serious sanctions. The problem you run into is that feedback loop where the person wants to know what happened and what was said, and reputations are at stake, and livelihoods are at stake. And so typically the person who lodged the complaint simply gets a letter of some kind saying, an investigation was made and appropriate actions were taken, which is woefully inadequate from the perspective of the person who lodged the complaint. But I do believe that they have the right to expect that it didn't just end up in the circular file, and that it was looked at, and that judgments were made and appropriate actions were taken. And so, but it's very awkward being in those situations because people have very high expectations as far as what will happen as a result of their complaint that are almost always found to be inadequately met. So I'm not sure exactly how to go about this, but I do think it is reasonable for someone to receive a response that at least this response was received and taken through proper channels and properly analyzed and taken seriously. At least we should do that.
I'm going to agree with Councilman Powell also in that respect, and kind of look back like at the police department itself. If you have a complaint that comes in, it'll be followed up on, but you have correspondence back to them. You're not going to tell them the outcome of it. You know, it's either exonerated or it's found, you know, substantiated, but at the end of the day, we don't discuss what's taken place, just the outcome of it, and whether punishment or not was handed down is not put out. But at least they know that it's been looked into and there's been it's been found one way or another, instead of just leaving people just hanging out there not knowing whatever is going to happen. Any other discussion? Vice Mayor Lutz.
Yeah, no, and I absolutely agree with, responding that it's been looked into or investigated, but I think where that becomes a problem as far as divulging information of what was found or what was looked into is, say somebody who owned a business or something on city council had a competitor who could therefore just lodge a complaint and then basically start asking questions like, well, if they own X percent, they could have done this. And so now you're expecting them to disclose what percentage of this company they own. That's not appropriate, and that's not what this needs to be about. And so I think that the details that come from that investigation or that looking into obviously need to be protected. The thing with the whistleblower thing, and we talked about this at the work session, is there's public records laws that we can't supersede at this council level. If you correspond with council, it can't be buried or made confidential or anything of that nature. It's public records. And so there's that fine line of, I understand that the whistleblower, or I don't really like that term, but the individual presenting the claim, maybe wants to have that function of anonymity, but that's just not really available to us in this sense, because the second you communicate with us through our city council emails, it's public records. The advisory council, I think when we compare it to something like the LGBTQ advisory council or the committee that we set up for the massage therapy, I think it's a good reminder that sometimes people kind of forget that advisory council has absolutely no power. None. They can't do anything. They can't put any ordinances into place. They simply advise city council. So in the idea of setting up this ethics committee, I don't really understand what their purpose or power would be, and I also don't really understand how we would make sure that they are qualified and really what they would be presenting back to council about. Obviously, we could explore that more. I don't really understand what their purpose would be, simply in the state of, I mean, they couldn't come back to council and say, you have to do this, or we're going to do this, or we're going to bring charges. I mean, they can't do that. They just advise council. And like John said, we have a ton of state laws in place that already take care of people who, do things when they're elected officials that are unsavory. The cooling off period, and we talked about this at the work session, I feel like it's somewhat arbitrary to put a number. So if you say it's 6 months, so if after 6 months somebody's been on council, within that 6 months that they're first off, it's not okay for them to touch any project that, they themselves voted on while they were in elected office. So if you're saying it's not okay in the first 6 months, it's okay at 7 months? I mean, if it's not okay, it's not okay. Having 6 months, 2 years, whatever period is, that doesn't make sense. That's arbitrary. If it's not okay, then it's not okay. And so I just personally don't think a cooling off period really accomplishes much of anything. But all the changes that John has proposed to us, I think are fantastic, and I think they beef this up to the extent of making it a little bit more what we want it to be.
Okay. Councilman Bates.
One thing I'd like to say is and I said it when we looked at the different committees that were created. If Ms. Hackett wants to create a committee for code of ethics to bring to council and say, hey, this is blah, 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 or whatever, we did it for one. If she can create a committee of it, I don't see why we wouldn't approve it. That's if somebody wants to go out there and put it all together and bring it back to us. Whether, like you said, it has no power, but if that's something they want to do, let them do it. That's all I have to say about that one.
Any other discussion? Councilman Cassidy.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything until Councilman Bates made his pitch for the committee. But basically, at that point, you are putting personnel matters, which are private matters, into public hands. And the results of that will wind up being to the general public. And just as was mentioned before about making or breaking people's reputations, this is too small of a community to turn things over to people that aren't specifically instructed, as is DCI, Sheriff's Department, HR departments, on the confidentiality of personnel issues. And that strongly concerns me more, to a point, than a potential violation of a little ethics policy if it destroys somebody's reputation. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, any amendments? Councilman Bates.
I'd like to, from our work packet last week on the suggestion amendment number 2, kind of want to change the language a little bit, but it would be B3A, 4th I, that it says, if any citizen or group of citizens has a reason to believe that a council member has or had a conflict of interest, the citizen with such belief shall inform governing body, as in ward representative. The governing body will have an affirmative obligation to respond to any citizen report. With that, so there's a part in here that says including disclosing all relevant facts and concerns relating thereto. I'm X-naying that completely out. Just the part that I read prior is if a citizen has a complaint that they feel an ethic was violated, they can bring it to their ward representative, which they can anyways. But then the governing body will be obligated to respond to that citizen's report. How it's responded, if it's, yes, we looked into it, or whatever we want to say on it, that's fine. But I do believe, I think that's a good wording to be put in there, so it's affirmed. So that's the amendment I'm making.
Okay, on that amendment that's on the floor, is there a second to that?
I'll second it for discussion.
Okay, second by Councilman Powell. Discussion.
I'll say this, if I may, Mr. Mayor, the problem, and our Vice Mayor pointed this out, is all of our meetings are in public. We cannot have an executive session to discuss matters involving council. So it is very problematic for us to resolve a matter that's brought to us, because very negative information can come about, and again, it have a serious impact on the council member who may be perfectly innocent. So I don't know what the procedure ought to be. I suppose at some point you involve the attorney, and the attorney looks into it and communicates it with us individually would be probably the best way to do that. And maybe a letter from the mayor following that the investigation took place. But I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, but I know that we really can't have a discussion about the complaint in a public meeting.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all fine and good to have another committee to report to, but we've already got state law that covers the issue. And if state law needs to be changed, Ms. Hackett can take that to the state, and let's get her changed. Once they do that, I'm in. Maybe not in, but at least it will come from an authority. But to just up and have another committee that you and I have to report to when somebody doesn't like that you sold a piece of land next door to them, to somebody, so you didn't get to use the state land, that's just out of reason. And that's where you're going to end up. You're going to be running city council by Facebook, and that's not going to work. So when the state law is changed, we'll readdress it, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, just point of order, the amendment really has to do with responding to the complaint, not forming a committee, correct?
Correct.
And when the state law says we have to respond to a complaint by a citizen, let's do it. But right now, we have ethics laws, and we have to abide by those ethics laws. And to put another committee in there does not get the job done.
Councilman Pacheco.
I guess we walk a fine line, because I do agree that the hard part is that we answer to the people. And I think that there's no line there, in the sense that we do answer to that. And if someone creates an ethic violation, a sitting council member especially, has an ethics violation, I think we have that, and John, maybe you can correct me, whether it's done with a public censure or whatever that may be, that there has to be some process within that. Maybe I'm wrong, but once you become a public official, you become a public official. And it's one thing to have to discipline an employee, but how does that work, John? I mean, kind of what Ken is saying, that we have a report, and this is what happens, and do we have, as elected officials, are we protected by that same right, or are we public officials and we have to be transparent, and that would be out in the open, like public censure, if something did transpire unethically?
From the way I'm understanding the proposal and what would transpire, the way I'm at least envisioning it is that you still are going to have to make that decision. And you're still going to need to get back with the person that you looked at this and made a decision. But to do that, it's got to be done in a public meeting. So, I mean, it could be not one of you, it could be one of your spouses or a former spouse or a child, And so it may not be just you or a business associate or a creditor or a bank or something like that, depending on where you go with the thing. But I don't know how you do it without raising it in a public manner. And again, the difficulty there is that if you don't have someone acting as that gatekeeper, just like in a criminal case, you get all kinds of reports to the police department. Holy cow. And if you don't have that gatekeeper and you have to investigate them all and make a decision and get back to somebody, then it makes it, I think, there's some mischief that could be made. Maybe that would never be made. Maybe it would be minimal mischief, but it certainly opens the door for that. So again, you can do it, but I think that there are some pitfalls out there when you go down that road, and you have to walk pretty carefully. But I'm not quite sure how to, if this is the body that's going to be the decision maker on something that's referenced to them by a member of the public about another member, I don't know how you get around that without having the public look at it, which means that any allegation Councilman Smith engaged in some lewd act in the parking garage. Let's have an investigation and talk about that. That gatekeeper is not there.
I guess the way I look at this, and Mr. Attorney, maybe you can answer this, but first of all, if it's a criminal offense, then obviously we're not, we're no longer talking about an ethics violation. We know where we go with that, and that'd be law enforcement being involved. If it's an ethics violation itself, I think going to your ward rep, and then it should be taken either to the vice mayor or to the mayor themselves, and that's where it should be handled, because you're almost asking all of us to judge each other up here as council members and to decide the fate of somebody, whether they did something right or wrong. And so I think that it really should probably come to the role of the vice mayor or the mayor, and at that point involve legal and do an investigation at that level. And maybe I'm off base, but I think it's almost if all of us as individual council members, a complaint comes in, we're being asked to judge one another, and that doesn't seem right. I don't know. Councilman Cathy.
Is that something that maybe if there is a complaint against a council member, that it doesn't even come to council? That complaint should maybe go to like the city manager to then deal with, does it even sound credible? Saw Steve flying around in a spacesuit. Yeah, I don't think so. But basically go to the city manager, then he and city attorney can discuss, do you go to DCI for an investigation? George is selling marijuana out of the back of his truck. That's probably gonna go someplace. But should it go to them? They make the decision then on, does it go to city police for investigation because it potentially involves even criminal activity at that point, or does it need to go higher up to DCI? But basically, if you're trying to do an investigation of a council member, I don't know as you necessarily want council involved, because it needs to be taken care of without going here, and then the results of that are then brought to council for either you need to censor whatever based on the findings of literally an independent second, third party. And if there is something that deals within the city manager or the city attorney, which are then our employees or the judge, then that comes to the mayor or the vice mayor. And then we go to the appropriate person for an investigation of that, and we keep the person fat, dumb, and happy going along doing whatever they're doing until an investigation is concluded, and you don't wind up then with the investigatee trying to cover up whatever else, if he doesn't, he, she, I'm using a generic here, but if that person doesn't even know that the investigation's going on.
So I have 2 comments to make on that. First of all, I think that if we were to turn it over to the city manager, it's almost like you're turning it over to your employee to tell the boss whether they did something right or wrong. You know, so I mean, and I don't mean that in an offensive manner, but I mean, obviously, they're employed by the council, and so for us to say that we want you to look at your boss and tell us whether we did something right or wrong, and then to follow up with that, you go back to law enforcement. If we have something that happens with one of our own employees, we don't investigate our own employees, because you always want to make sure that when you're done, if you came out and said, well, they didn't do anything wrong, the very first person everybody's going to say is, well, of course they didn't do anything wrong because they work for you. So I almost wonder if maybe if you had a complaint that was lodged against this council, if maybe not looking at an outside agency, and maybe that outside agency is not an agency, it's maybe the county commission, of going to them and saying, look, we've had an ethics violation against one of our own on city council. Could you look at this as a commission and see if there was a violation of ethics? Because obviously it wouldn't involve criminal.
Yeah, the same road I'm interested in.
Yeah. So, but it's an outside source. It's not us saying, you know, yes, Kristen messed up, or no, she didn't. There's no question about it. At the end of the day, the commission can come back and say, we looked into it and this is what happened, or this is not what happened. So I think, in my opinion, that's probably the best route to go with a complaint that comes against one of us, is to see if the commission would be on board to listen to us. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, everybody. Pursuant to the amendment that has been proposed by Councilman Bates, when you look at the core of the intent as it relates to that language, the response that council could provide, in my estimation, that would fulfill the requirement could be, we received the complaint and we're following up, and that would be it. So if indeed you are persuaded that this might be a reasonable amendment to consider, the reality is the core requirements of what the amendment is suggesting really is no more, in my opinion, than what I'm proposing council could do in response. It gives the citizen the acknowledgement that indeed we got it, we're looking at it, and that citizen may or may not be, you know, eligible, I guess you'd say, to hear a formal response pursuant to the nature of the complaint. So, like I said, if you're persuaded to consider this, in my estimation, that would satisfy the intent of the amendment. It wouldn't have to be a verdict, if you will, included in that letter.
Any other discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I'm afraid this might be voted down, I'm afraid this might be voted down without a replacement, so I'm wondering if I could offer a friendly amendment that would say, once the complaint is received by a member of council, it will be forwarded to the mayor, who will take appropriate action and have all further communication with the complainant, or something to that effect, again, to show that the complaint was received.
I'd like to see received and responded, because that's the other aspect, is the governing body will have an affirmative obligation to respond to any citizen's report. And I think that is, and I listened just a little while ago, and we all agreed before I made this amendment in the discussion that they should have a response. For whatever that response says, yes, we are looking into it, doesn't go any further than that, but I just believe that we need to make sure that. So I'm fine with the wording that you did, but also that the it will be reported to, we are obligated, or the mayor is obligated to respond.
I'm concerned, if I may, Mr. Mayor, that the word response would sort of tease the complainant into expecting a lot of detail that may not be forthcoming, or probably shouldn't be forthcoming. And so maybe the language could be, if I may, to say and I told myself I wasn't going to talk about all of this because I'm not the one who's going to have to be dealing with it, but having gone through some of this, that it would be forwarded to the mayor, and the mayor will communicate with the complainant and indicate whether an investigation is underway or something to that effect. Response, I think, again, may suggest that they'll hear more than they're probably going to hear.
Councilman Johnson.
You could say that the mayor or the council will acknowledge the receipt of the complaint, and then may or may not be responded to or something like that. More of an acknowledgement of the complaint, to let them know we got your complaint, and we are looking into it.
Councilman Hopkins.
What happens when you start getting these? Suppose you have somebody that's really unpopular just because they happen to have blue hair. And so you get hundreds of these complaints from hundreds of people. And then the press comes along and says, we want the FOI, and we want to know who voted and what they said about that complaint. You guys are just making a quagmire with us. If we do this, we are reasonable people. If somebody's really doing something out of line, you're probably going to hear about it, Mr. Mayor, or I will, or one of us will. And then we have to address it. But to put this down in, essentially in a statute, that we will respond to every one of these, you're just making a mess. That's all you're doing is making a mess. And you turn it into a rumor mill, and you turn it into something that if they really don't like the way somebody does something, if somebody has a dog that does something wrong, and you get all the people around them to write letters, and you type in their names, and then all of a sudden they sign them, and they send this to you, what are you going to do? And then the press comes along and says, well, how many of those did you get? And what were they about? So you're making a monster. We've got a good ordinance the way it is, and to be messing with it, I think we're goofing up.
Councilman Bates.
I think everything that we're doing, we're trying to hold ourselves accountable and hold each other accountable. And if this is one way that continues to hold us accountable in the position that we are currently in, and we hold to our this code and ethics, I don't think we can do us much harm, because that's the key thing, is making sure we stay in bounds. That's my opinion.
Councilman Pacheco.
I guess I don't see a problem with saying we're going to be obligated to respond to an ethics concern of a citizen. I find it humorous that it's being suggested that we wouldn't respond. If we get 20,000 complaints, you should respond. It's our duty as public officials to respond. It's the same thing that happened with the cat thing. You know, we got upset. Oh my gosh, we had all these emails come in. Well, you signed up for it. You don't want to get complaints, and you don't want that type of stuff happening. Don't run for public office. We have an obligation to respond to our constituents. That's the problem when we put ourselves in an ivory tower as public officials. And it's time for us to understand that we serve and work for the taxpayers and the people that are living in this city. So I will vote for that, because we are obligated to respond to people if they are concerned about something. And I challenge the rest of this council to vote for that, because it's an important aspect of it. We are obligated to respond. We are not above that, and we're not above the law.
And I just want to add to what Councilman Pacheco just said, is that's part of the reason why we're here and we're even discussing this code of ethics, is because a complaint was brought forward that was never responded to. So, Councilman Cathy.
The one thing I wanted to say and clarify is I do believe the reason that people were upset with the responses on the CAD ordinance wasn't that we got the complaints, but we got over 300 of them, and only 15 of them were from our constituents. I don't think any of us needed our inboxes jammed with 300 emails from South Africa and Great Britain and Canada and New York. And that was what upset me personally. I kept the 15 complaints from the Casper citizens, and I still have them on my email.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to make it clear that I am absolutely opposed to any discussion of an ethical complaint by council. All I'm suggesting is a friendly amendment to Councilman Bates' amendment that a council member that receives a complaint that appears to have some credibility would be discussed with the mayor, and the mayor will confirm receipt of that, as Councilman Johnson says, with the complainant, and indicate whether some investigation is underway or something to that effect. It would never come to the awareness of the rest of us. And if there were communications between the two council members, I believe those can occur without any violation of the Public Information Acts. And if there are communications with the attorney regarding appropriate actions, I believe those can also take place discreetly, without damaging reputations. But once it cannot come to the floor, I'm absolutely convinced of that.
Any other discussion? Vice Mayor Lutz.
I feel like we're spiraling. Can somebody explain to me what exactly the wording is that we're going to be voting on in a second?
I think that what's on the table now is that any complaint can be brought forward to a council member. It'll be taken to the mayor, at which time, go ahead.
Mayor or vice mayor, because if the complaint's about you, it should be able to go to the vice mayor. So just throw that in there if that's okay.
Okay, so it'll go to the mayor or the vice mayor, who will then communicate back with the complainant that the complaint has been received and being looked into.
I think we have an amendment on the floor too.
That is it.
That was my suggestion, if Councilman Bates would accept it.
Okay.
There was an amendment on the floor. Councilman Powell added to that amendment, so I just summarized that. So if Councilman Bates is good with that amendment, that would be the one on the floor now.
Before we move to a vote, sorry to interrupt, but could we get Mr. Henley to comment on this, whether this creates any exposure issues or in any way invalidates his work?
As I understand, basically the amendment of Councilman Bates, which was seconded by Councilman Powell, Councilman Powell's made a friendly amendment, which was offered up, and it's been accepted by Councilman Bates. And basically, if there was a complaint, that complaint would get forwarded to either the mayor or vice mayor, and then the mayor or vice mayor would basically act upon that complaint using their judgment discretion and potentially calling on the city attorney's office or others within the organization for assistance. And then depending on how that would played out, something may or may not happen. You know, I think you can put those out there, and that certainly sounds much better than having a discussion in the council as a whole, or maybe sending it off to DCI and you have to wait until you get some response back from them before you can move forward. So it does alleviate, I think, a couple of concerns that I had with the earlier suggestion.
I think the only other part that we had in there was that the mayor, vice mayor, whoever has that complaint will contact the complainant back and keep, yep, okay.
I agree with that language. I think it'd be terrific.
Any further discussion on this amendment?
I will just point out, Mr. Mayor, if I may, that as this plays out, this entire process would happen outside of the knowledge of the rest of council, and I believe that's appropriate. So something may occur, and it would never come to any of us. Unless the mayor thought that was indicated.
Okay, on that amendment then, are there any abstention or nay votes?
Nay vote.
Okay, all voting aye.
Aye.
Please record the vote on the amendment.
With Councilmember Hopkins voting nay, motion to amend passed.
All right, now we'll go back to the original ordinance as amended. Any further discussion? Okay, any other amendments? Okay, any abstention or nay votes?
I will now vote nay on the original, since it incorporates changes.
Okay. All voting aye?
Aye.
Please record the vote.
With Councilman Hopkins voting nay, motion passed.
Okay. Please read the ordinance on second reading by title only.
An ordinance approving the vacation of a 0.017 acre portion of public right-of-way, an alley located between Lot 17, Natrona Heights re-subdivision, and Lot 4 of White's Addition.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve on second reading the ordinance just read.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councilman Pacheco, second by Councilman Hopkins. Council will now listen to public comment. Public comments are limited to 5 minutes and no duplication of speakers will be allowed. Is there anybody who would like to comment on this? Okay, any discussion? Any amendments? Any abstention or nay votes? All voting aye?
Aye.
Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passed.
Please read the consent resolutions by title only.
Item 10A1, a funding agreement with the Central Wyoming Regional Water Joint Powers Board for the Risk and Resilience Assessment and Emergency Response Plan update. Item 10A2, a fire utility line permit with the Wyoming Department of Transportation. Item 10A3, a groundwatering monitoring wells license with the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality. Item 10A4, the purchase of ultraviolet equipment from UV Doctors lamps. Item 10A5, a change order number 1 to the Event Center Fire Alarm Replacement Project with Casper Electric. Item 10A6, an outside city sewer agreement with the Babcock Family Trust. Item 10A7, an agreement for the ball field lighting replacements project with City Service Electrical Company. Item 10A8, an agreement for the Goodstein Parking Lot Improvements Project with Knife River. Item 10A9, an amendment number 1 to the 5-year Casper closed bail fill monitoring and reporting project with Golder Associates. Item 10A10, an agreement for water rights with HDR Engineering. Item 10A9, a contract for the Lathrop Road traffic study with the Casper Area Metropolitan Planning Organization and Western Research and Development. Item 10A12, a memorandum of understanding for a raised bed garden on the Fort Casper grounds with the Troopers Drum and Bugle Corps. Item 10A13, a letter of support for the Community Wins Grant application to be submitted by the Casper Housing Authority. Item 10A14, accepting a river restoration grant from the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission. And item 10A15, a water service agreement with Vista West Water Company and Frederick J. Schott, Jr.
Chair would entertain a motion to adopt consent resolutions just read.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins, second by Councilman Johnson. Mr. City Manager, are there any comments you'd like to make on this?
No, sir, thank you.
Okay. Any abstention or nay votes? Councilman Bates?
I'm going to say nay for A15.
Okay. All voting aye?
Aye.
Please record the vote.
Councilman Bates voting nay on the last item, motion passed.
Please read the consent minute action titles.
Item 11A1, reappointing Tim Shank, Nicholas Grooms, and William Reese to the Downtown Development Authority Board of Directors. And item 11A2, appointing Dr. Matthew Wold to the Casper Natrona County Health Department Board.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve the consent minute action agenda items just read.
Second.
Moved by Councilman McCarthy, second by Vice Mayor Lutz. Any abstention or nay votes? All voting aye.
Aye.
Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passed.
This time we ask council members to bring forward relevant concerns or items of interest. Councilman Cathy.
We had another, what appeared to be very... There we go. We had another successful committee meeting for the massage therapy ordinance, and I wound up then having a meeting with our city attorney today to try to implement those into the ordinance that we had. We actually, and I appreciated it, got a very nice email, Councilman Huber and I, from Mr. Wenino, that he thought we were doing a good job and that he appreciated the way we kept the meeting moving and on task. So people are thinking from the committee standpoint that we're doing a good job. And hopefully, depending on how the rest of this week goes, we may have a final resolution for you, and I can make my 90 minutes next Tuesday down to about 30. But I will warn everybody, unless we go to 4 font, it's not going to be on 3 pages.
All right.
Because we turned it over to a lawyer. No.
It's gonna be your fault, John.
Only kidding, Mr. Henley. He has been doing an excellent job, and I want to commend him and Amanda and Heather for their work in taking the notes and communicating the things back. And so, yes, I want to thank them very much. Their help has been immense.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Hopkins.
Nothing, good night, thank you.
Okay, Councilman Johnson.
I just have a question. Someone asked me, I wasn't sure. It's for the city manager. Have we stopped giving arrest logs to the media?
Here comes the answer.
Here we go. Why don't we turn that over to Captain Cheney? Thank you.
Can you repeat the question? I heard arrest logs, sure.
A citizen had expressed to me that we had stopped providing the media arrest logs, and I wasn't sure if that was true or not.
Yes, that has ceased some time ago.
How long
There was
ago?
some discussion with the sheriff's department, I believe, as well as some statute stuff, that some of that stuff was, while they can get it through circuit court, it's not with the COVID things and so on and so forth, we stopped having press briefings and things like that.
Okay. How long ago was that?
Probably first part of March, somewhere in there. We haven't had a press briefing in quite some time where the media actually comes in and sits down with us. It's either done through email, things like that.
Right. Okay. All right, thank you.
They're still able to obtain arrest logs, though, correct?
Yes, they are.
Yep.
Yep. They just have to go through other channels to get that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Anything else?
Anything else? Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Embrace yourselves. I have always been proud to be a resident of this community. Over the years, I have frequently bragged to my friends around the country that Casper is a place where people care about each other. They look out for each other. They help each other. Well, it's been hard for me to brag lately. Like all of you, I am sick of talking about COVID-19. I'm sick of hearing it. It just won't go away. It's affected every part of our lives. It's in every conversation, and it's been old for a long time. I get that. Like most people, I don't like wearing a mask. It's uncomfortable for me. I have a hard time reading people's facial expressions, and it impairs communication. It's an uncomfortable business. Here, at least I can put this mask down because we are appropriately socially distanced. But folks, we're in a surge. We're seeing more people test positive, we're seeing more people end up in the hospital, and we're seeing more people die. It isn't just here, it's many other places in the country. It seems to be happening every place there is a public gathering without people wearing masks. Now we even have it in our White House. For months, our governor and our health experts have been begging us all to wear masks. We know now that at least 40% of the people who carry the virus are asymptomatic, which means that none of us know whether we are carrying that virus and potentially spreading it to other people. So why wear a mask? Well, we all know now that this is an airborne virus. All this cleaning of surfaces probably helps a little bit, but the way it's transmitted is through our breathing. And if people don't believe a mask works, all you have to do is breathe into a mirror with a mask on and breathe into a mirror with a mask with no mask on. And you will see where the virus lives. It lives in those water droplets that we exhale every time we breathe. I was at a grocery store Saturday. Mandatory wearing of masks was very clearly displayed, and most people complied. 5 to 10% of the people, I would estimate, walked right past that sign, defying the property rights of that grocery store owner without wearing a mask and potentially infecting all of us that were there shopping for groceries, which is an essential activity. Worse yet, I was at a meeting last week with community leaders, the movers and shakers of Casper. Probably over 100 people there. There were 3 of us wearing a mask. And you feel uncomfortable wearing a mask, like something must be wrong with me. Nobody else seems to be worried about this. Well, statistically, there's a high likelihood that the virus was in that room and that somebody was passing that virus to innocent people who had no idea that they were being exposed. And why is that? Well, people say it's uncomfortable. I have trouble breathing with a mask on. Or they're accepting some of this drivel that this is all a hoax or it's being exaggerated for political purposes. And then we also have, as far as I'm concerned, 2-year-olds masquerading as adults who say, "It's my choice and you can't make me." For me, I'm done with being nice about this. We have a serious problem in this community. The night before last, my mother-in-law died due to COVID-19. She was a great woman. And after a week of pure misery, gasping for every breath, her lungs finally filled with fluid, and she died. She suffocated. That's how you die with this disease. We don't know how she got it, but like the other 200,000 families that are grieving the loss of a loved one, we know that somehow she got exposed, and she got exposed by another human being that had the virus. And there are many thousands more who have permanent disabilities following a course of this disease. Cognitive disabilities, internal disorders, heart disorders. It's a serious, serious problem. And who is infecting them? It's people who either don't care or haven't listened to the advice or are making these ridiculous statements about it's my choice and this is my independence. Well, because of that, my mother-in-law is dead. Needlessly, along with many others. And why? Well, because somebody was too lazy, or too selfish, or too stupid to wear a mask. And if you're one of those who refuses to wear a mask, when social distancing wasn't possible? Nice work. Thank you so much. I'm so happy that you had an opportunity to express your constitutional right to infect an innocent party and possibly put them in the hospital or even cause them to die. You, those of you who refuse to wear masks, are the reason this virus is going to go on indefinitely. You are the reason more people are going to get sick and die. You are the reason that we will have more restrictions and more economic disruption because of it. My message to the citizens of Casper is, get your act together and wear a mask. The situation you have put us in is ridiculous and unnecessary. Wear the damn mask. Thank you.
Councilman Bates.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one, I want to thank Mr. Gabriel for his care about the citizens and asking if we have an action plan for situations that may come up. And just to have somebody come up and have a care for the rest of the citizens, I just wanted to say thank you for that, and I didn't get the opportunity earlier. The only other thing that is the Republic of Women is doing a forum for the council on this coming Thursday, October 8th at 6:30 at the Ramkota. So all the candidates for this position will be there discussing or answering questions that come about. So just wanted to give you a heads up.
Councilman Pacheco.
Thank you. First, let me extend my condolences to Lorraine's mother. I worked with Lorraine. I knew Lorraine I've known her for many years. She taught my children at St. Anthony's, so I extend my condolences to Lorraine and to your family, which I'm sure is a very difficult time. Just to quickly wrap up, I think we are polarized, Gabriel. I've gone to coffee with Gabriel a couple times, and we've had some good conversations. He's a young person interested in the political system and government, and I think that we are polarized. We are a nation trying to figure out what we're trying to do, how we're going to do this. You're wrong. We're very tribalistic, politically, ideologically right now. And somehow, somewhere, we have to figure out, I don't know what it is. If I was be able to figure it out, I'd win a Nobel Peace Prize. But what does concern me is that we are polarized. But I always try to bring it back to our council when we talk, is that this council, though we disagree, though we have those conversations, and sometimes we kind of get at each other, one of the things that I like about this council is that we understand each other, and we can walk away from here and still be friends. We can still respect each other. And I think that this is a testament, and I hope the rest of this community knows, the testament of what this council tries to do and the respect that we have for each other. I stand with Charlie and ask the community to begin to start taking a self-reflection on how we can be safer. We are having a surge in this community. And so I ask that we do try to look at ourselves and reflect how we can protect our families, what we can do to do those things, to really search that empathic part of our souls, because you would do anything to save your family. You would do anything to save your children, anything to save your parents. What can we do to be a better community and mindful of everybody and mindful that we are all trying to just live this life, that we have one life we get. And I hope and I pray that we can work together, whether we're a Democrat, whether we're a Republican, whether we're an independent, that we've got to learn that we're going to disagree, but that we still can care for one another. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
Gabriel hit on a good point of, we're always told to have a couple weeks extra of rations or whatever you want to call them, stored at your home, your apartment, whatever it is that you call home. I'm going to botch this statistic because I don't remember it off the top of my head, but roughly, I think it's like 93% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And so, as you can imagine, people who are struggling to pay bills and purchase groceries for that week, it's very difficult when, situations like this arise and all of a sudden somebody is like, what do you mean you're out of toilet paper? I have 4,600 rolls out in my garage. Well, not all of us can afford to have 4,600 rolls stocked up in our garage. And so just a reminder to keep your neighborly eye out for those that may be less fortunate and don't have the capability of stocking things such as food or maybe, things that expire quickly like milk and eggs. And just keeping an eye out for those who might need your help because they can't accomplish that themselves. That's all tonight.
Well, and a couple things I'll just add on to that is that, we talk about, the supply chain itself as this is all taking place. There's a lot of things that happen that make that become a problem. People panic in the very beginning and everybody wants to go out and stock up on everything. And then when COVID hit and everybody was pretty much quarantined, everything shut down. So now we feel the effects of the supply chain being empty and playing catch up. I know trying to buy an appliance, for the last 6 weeks for a house is almost impossible because they're so backed up, and that's everything across the board. So there's a lot of things that go into it and a lot of things that the moving parts of this whole thing that I don't think anybody in the world could just sit back and sit there and say, well, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. A lot of things we have to play as they go and resolve those things. A couple things I want to bring up tonight. I had a discussion with a gal here in town that brought up something that I would like to put on a work session for the future and maybe even into next year when we have new council on. Not that I don't want the input of council now, but I think it's going to be kind of a big project. But when we have a long-term plan for growth, and we look at our goals and capital projects, and they only go out so far. But the question was brought up: do we have a strategic plan for Casper itself? And where do we really want to be 20 years, 30 years down the road? And that's kind of look at any business that you run. You want to have a business plan in place so you know where you're headed, you know what you're going for. And I think it's important that maybe we take a look at that and see if we can't put some kind of a strategic plan in place. What kind of industry, we always talk about wanting to diversify, but how are we going to diversify? We talk about it and then we go 20 different directions. Maybe we should have a plan in place of what we want to attract here and how we want to diversify this community and what we need to do to make that happen. Another thing that I would like to see if we can put on a work session, this can happen whenever, but it seems lately some of these contracts that we have, I've gotten a lot of complaints lately of them not coming in on time, and not to put anything on the spot, but I think one of the biggest ones right now is, our ice rink is down, and I think that was due to be done. I don't know when the actual time frame was for it to be finished, but I know it's gotten pushed off, and it was pushed off because there was some issues with COVID that took place with the crew that worked there. But now we're looking, it's getting pushed way down the road, and so I think I would like to have a discussion just on the sheer fact of when we have these contracts in place, when we hit those deadlines, what are we doing to ensure that we're not extending way out and we're holding people to the contracts themselves? Because I kind of feel like with the ice rink itself being down probably half of the season for hockey and ice skating and stuff, that's a lot of revenue that we're losing, but it's also a lot of kiddos that aren't going to be doing the events they normally do. And some of them, I guess you look at hockey, just because that's kind of near and dear to my heart, you look at that, if that season were to be canceled altogether, again, you got high school kids, seniors that are not going to play, or they probably played their last game last year. And I get it. It's the sign of the times and things that are going on. But if there's things that we can do in those contracts to make them to where we're holding people's feet to the fire to get them done in time, then that's something I want to discuss. And the only other thing, and it kind of flies in the face with, with wearing masks and everything else, but I want to put it out there, social distancing, everything is being put in place at the Casper Event Center, and I think everybody, there's some normalcy happening there with PBR was in town this last weekend. They're still set up. They're coming back in this next weekend. And I would just put it out there for people that you want some normalcy. All the guidelines are being followed and put in place, and it's time to get back out there and actually enjoy a show and do something with your family and whatnot. And PBR will be here Friday and Saturday night, correct, Tim? Okay, so Friday and Saturday night. And so I'd say go up there and take advantage of it. That's all I've got. So the next meetings of the City Council will be a work session to be held at 4:30 p.m. Tuesday, October 13th, 2020 in the council chambers. And a regular council meeting will be held at 6 p.m. Tuesday, October 20th, 2020 in the council chambers. A notice of an executive session take place at this date and during this meeting was given. We have a matter to discuss regarding personnel. Therefore, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session, and at the conclusion of the executive session to reconvene this regular meeting solely for the purposes of adjournment of this regular meeting. Moved by Councilman Cathey, second by Councilman Bates. There being a majority of members present in a motion to adjourn into an executive session having been moved and seconded, and that motion requiring a 2/3 majority of the council present. Are there any abstentions or nay votes? All voting aye. Please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion passed.
Greater than 2/3 majority of the council present voted in favor of the motion. We are hereby adjourned into an executive session.